Debrief, glad you're with us. For those of you watching on the Law&Crime Network, let's go live to testimony in the trial of an Arizona man accused of shooting a live PD officer in the face. Ramon Bueno, the defendant, Trooper James Casey, the victim who survived. Casey pulled over a vehicle for having dark tinted windows, and authorities say Bueno, one of the backseat occupants, started shooting from directly behind the driver. Trooper Casey is on the stand right now in that trial describing the stop. We expect this to become intense. Let's listen.
And he appears to be asleep. He hasn't opened his eyes one time, anytime I've said that. So,
you keep talking about the window. Which window did you ask Ms. Richardson or the driver to roll down?
The driver's side rear window. The two passenger side front and rear windows were still up. So they would never roll down. So they were still up at this time.
What was it that caught your attention to make the individuals in the back seat show their hands?
Well, because the male that was sitting behind the driver, as I said to you, the female, she was wrapped up in a blanket, and he had his hands under that blanket, and I could not see what he was doing. One, because of the window, and I had that pillar, but B, his hands down where I could not see them made me very concerned. So that's why I said, let me see your hands. And, he quickly stopped, and he looked at me, and he put his hands on his legs, and that's when I had her roll the window down. So then I could look. And then because of the action, and again, the other thing too that, again, it struck me as so odd is the female that was with the blanket was staring straight ahead, never looked, nobody was looking at me. And so, based on everything, I asked the driver to take the keys out of the ignition and put them on top of the dashboard.
Did she do that?
Yes, she did. And in retrospect, I should have had her hand me the keys, and I would have put them on the top of the car. Why this is done? Just a pursuit prevention. You don't want them. You hope they don't take off on you. So that's mainly the reason for it.
Describe the blanket that the middle rear passenger had. Sure.
The best way I could describe it is if you've ever been on a plane, a bus, a train, anything like that, a cheap blanket. Not a comforter, not something you see on a bed, huge, but something like cheap that, is long, but not real thick. A cheap blanket would be the way I would describe it.
Did the individual behind the driver's seat comply and put both of his hands where you asked him to?
He did.
And what about the woman who was next to him?
Well, she kept her hands in the blanket, so I could see her hands, so I really, that's fine with me. And then the same with the guy sleeping, because, I could see his hands, so I was fine with that. As long as I could see them, I was fine. So then when they all did that and I saw the three in the back like I said, the guy that was sitting on the passenger rear, he acted like he was asleep, so I really had no dealing at this time with him. But the two, the male and the female, she kept that blanket up, and the male kept, I saw his hands. They were on his legs, on his thighs, on top of his thighs.
What was the demeanor of the backseat passengers?
Like they did not want to be there, is the best I can. They, not argumentative, nothing like that, but I could just tell, I was making them very uneasy. Like I said, nobody would look at me. Even when the male put his hands on his knees, he just started staring straight into almost like the back of the front seat, like nobody would look at me.
What happened next?
So then I went back to speaking to the driver, and I asked her what she was doing. I asked her, she handed me her license and registration. I explained to her that I was stopping her for window tint, but because I'd already had her take the keys out of the ignition, and I just, at this point, I didn't want that car to take off of me. I wasn't going to have her put those keys back in the ignition to check the tint meter. At that point, the traffic infraction that could wait. So I asked her what she was doing, and she told me she was bringing her some friends home, or to a house. And I asked her, so I followed up with, okay, well, what's her name? And I pointed, and at that point, I pointed to the front seat passenger, and let me back up. I looked at her license. It was Lori Richardson. Lori Latrice Richardson was the license that I had. So I said to Lori, who is that person sitting next to you in the front passenger seat? And she said, I know her name is, and she gave me a name like Cookie. And I said, I don't want a street name. I don't want a moniker. I want a birth name. What is her name? Who is she? And she said, I don't know. And I said, how long have you met her? And she said earlier today. Now, I could have interpreted that. I'd interpret that to mean she just met these people earlier in the day. That could have meant she was with them earlier. I don't know. Or that person next to her. So at that point, based on, she's scantily dressed, doesn't know who she's, with, and again, nobody is looking at me, they're all staring straight ahead. I asked her for her ID, and she gave it to me, and then I went back to the back, and I asked the person behind the driver. I basically went right in order with, I asked him, I handed him my notepad and a pen, and I said, I want you to legibly write your name and a date of birth on your notepad, on my notepad. And then once he did, I watched him do it, then he handed it to the female that sat next to him. She did, and then she started to hold it out like this to the guy that was sleeping, or, acting like he was sleeping. Still, he had not moved. So I said, hey, I need you to sign my notepad. I need your name and your date of birth. He didn't respond. So I asked him a second time, name and date of birth. He didn't respond. So then I said, man, are you okay? He didn't respond the third time. So I asked him a second, man, are you okay? He doesn't respond. So after 4 times, I tell him, I said, listen, if you don't respond the 5th time, I'm going to call an ambulance because you're a medical emergency in my eyes, because, you're completely unresponsive. That's just, it's unreal. And so he opened his eyes and he looked at me and he told me, I hate cops. And I said, yeah, me too. Trying to elicit a response. Nothing. Nobody in the car laughed. Nobody. They all just stared straight ahead.
Well, I'm going to stop you there. Did you still have your eyes on the rear passenger who was behind the front passenger seat?
I did.
Did he move his arms in any way, any furtive movements?
No. He kept his hands on his thighs. She, the whole time next to him, had that blanket wrapped up like she was cold. And I mean, it was, it wasn't cold to me, but it could have been cold to her. I don't know. But she had it wrapped around her like she was cold right up to her chin. And then at this point, when the male said that and I said it back, he kind of looked like he was, aggravated. I woke him up. So he wrote a name down, and then I went back to my cruiser, and I called in. I let dispatch know that I was going to be calling 5 1029s, which are warrant checks.
Let me ask you this. Why did you make the comment, I don't like cops either?
Well, I because of that reason, I did that. I've used that comment many times throughout my career. And usually it's calmed down the biggest, the most out of control, because it's like that you kind of like, it almost like throws a curveball at them. So you kind of like, look at me and it's worked most of the time. I get some response out of it, and usually, surprisingly, it's calmed down some pretty aggravated people because they look at me like, what, or they laugh, and, so that was why.
When you had the individuals write down their names, you started in the rear driver's side?
Yes, I did, yes.
And then it went to the female?
In the middle.
And then it ended with the guy who was pretending to sleep who didn't like cops, he said?
Yeah, that's correct. And he was behind the front passenger seat.
And when you went back and you said you were...
This is live testimony from Trooper James Casey in the trial of Ramon Bueno, the man accused of shooting him in the face. The trooper has gone through a number of surgeries to reconstruct his face and recover from the wounds. Let's jump in with analysis here. Attorneys Adam Konta, Katherine Smith, Brian Buckmire are with me here. So Brian Buckmire, I'm listening to this guy. I believe him. His memory's clear. He remembers details. What do you make of the testimony?
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of detail. He's going back and forth between the driver as well as the passenger in the back. And I'm kind of waiting to him finally say, and the person in the back of the car was, and point to the defendant. I think that's the major key here. And until I hear it, I'm not hearing anything else other than this guy went through a very tragic situation.
Well, we've got all this testimony as well, Katherine Smith, that something just isn't right about this stop, that people are being shady, they're not wanting to communicate with him. Does that all add up?
I mean, it can. I mean, some of the stuff that he said I thought was, that they were all looking straight forward and one person was scantily clad. I mean, I think some of these things are a little thin on sounding like the entire car was full of criminals and it was suspicious. I think that the I hate cops comment was definitely not a great comment for one of them to make, but I'm waiting, just as Brian is, to hear the aha moment that it was the defendant who did it.
Adam Konta, we know that there was an identification issue in this case, that Trooper Casey ultimately identified the wrong person at one point. So is the big aha moment Brian Buckmire is waiting for potentially not going to come here?
Oh, I don't think it is going to come. I think at the end of this trial, the defense is going to be able to get up and say, yes, this was a tragic situation. No, we don't know who shot him.
We need to take a break here on the Daily Debrief. For those of you watching live on the Law and Crime Network, we will stick with this testimony as the broadcast continues. Trooper James Casey testifying right now in a courtroom about being shot in the face during a traffic stop. The defendant here, Ramon Bueno. Trooper Casey says that Bueno gave him the name Johnny Ruiz during that stop. Let's listen back into how he explained the events of that day.
And how I can decipher that, so if you look at that 527, the weird writing, that's my writing, because my twos are very distinguishable. That's 527 right there, 9802. So if you see right below that where Johnny Ruiz, the handwriting is different. So, and the same with the very top. It wasn't uncommon for me to hand my notepad to people, especially on the night shift, so it could have my writing or others' writing. So that's those three names below that social security number, I'm related as the same as that one above it. And Richard Aguilar was the name the person behind the front seat passenger gave me. And then, okay, so I forgot.
So what
at
did
that
you
point,
learn with the records check?
Yeah, and Trooper Cruz. Okay, so as I was running the names, as the fifth name, the Aguilar name, Richard Aguilar, came back, no record found. At that point, Trooper Cruz had arrived on scene. He walked up to my vehicle. I rolled my passenger front window down because I was still sitting down by the computer. And he asked me what I had, and I told him I had 5 in the vehicle. I said they were very suspicious, and I said the 2 males in the rear were giving me false names. And I explained to him that the person on the driver's side, passenger, was basically acting like he was asleep, so I was going to deal with the one in the passenger, the driver's side front first, and then I would get to that guy. So as I was talking to him, and I was actually in my car, at that point Trooper Alfano arrived, and he caught up to Trooper Cruz and myself, and we explained to him what was going on, 5 in the vehicle, suspicious, and 2 giving false names. So, and I explained to him I was going to deal with the person on the driver's side, rear seat, that male first, and then that other male second.
When you went back to the car, where did Trooper Alfano and where did Trooper Cruz go, if you remember?
I do. Trooper Cruz walked over to the passenger rear of the vehicle. Trooper Alfano, he walked to Trooper Cruz walked to the passenger side rear of the vehicle. Trooper Alfano walked to the rear of the vehicle and eventually wound up sliding over a little towards the passenger side, or on the driver's side, my side of the vehicle, and I walked to the rear driver's side of the vehicle. So I was now looking into the rear passenger window, talking to the male.
Which male were you talking to?
The name that he gave me?
No, were you talking to the person behind the driver's seat?
That's correct.
And what was, tell us what was said.
So I went up to him, and then so I can set it up. The driver, Lori Richardson, she's got her hands on the steering wheel. Vanessa Martinez, she's got her hands on her knees. The male had his left hand on his knee, or on his thigh, And his right hand was, I did not see his right hand. The female, she was still wrapped in a blanket tied up to her chin, and the male on the passenger rear, he was still laying on the window.
Could you still see his hands?
I could still see both his hands.
So did you say anything now when you went back to the vehicle?
I did. I looked at that male, the Johnny Ruiz, or the name he gave me, Johnny Ruiz, and I told him that he was giving me a false name, and he told me he wasn't, and I told him he was, and I told him that he wasn't going to go anywhere. I said if he's going to keep giving me a false, and I told him, I tried to give him the, look, if you just got traffic warrants, you can potentially going to make this a lot worse, because and usually that was most of the time on midnights. We got a lot of petty traffic warrants or small misdemeanor warrants. And, and I explained to them, if they gave me a false name, what I was going to do, I would take him down, detain him, bring him to the station, and I was going to have we have crime lab people, they come and fingerprint them. And then I warn them that, and there's a sign in our booking room that talks about forgery. And I tell them they're going to sign that name, their fingerprint card as, well, in this case, it would have been Johnny Ruiz. And when his fingerprints come back on file to who he truly is, then I'm going to charge him with forgery because it's a government document.
Did you have that conversation?
I did.
With your passenger?
I did.
What happened next?
He told me that was him, and so I said, okay, let me have your social security number. I'll run it that way. And he said, what? I said, your social security number. I said, let me have your social security number. I'll run you that way. And so he said 6. And then he said, when he said 6, I started to lean in because it sounded like he was giving me something. And he said 0. And I heard 0. And the next thing I heard was an explosion. And as I've said, I always thought it spun me completely around, but it spun me. The last thing I remember is I saw Trooper Alfano, and he had a look of terror on his face, and I don't remember anything after that. I just went down.
Did you hear additional gunshots?
I didn't hear anything.
Tell us what you remember happening next.
I remember Ray, or Trooper Cruz, Ray, I saw him, I remember him straddling me, and I remember I was looking up at him, and he kept saying, Casey, Casey. He's like, you okay, you okay? And I remember he told me that I had been shot. And I was making a mental note not to touch my face, because I was afraid if I put my hands in my face, I'd feel a gaping hole, and I would go into shock and die. I remember he kept saying that, and I remember when I was looking down, all I could see, the two things that I remember seeing the legs of 2 blue uniforms running my way, which would probably be Phoenix police officers. And I remember one of them, I just remember one of them laying there, and he was like just shaking me and telling me, don't let that scumbag kill you. Hang in, So, let me continue?
What were you feeling?
I wasn't feeling anything. I think I was in shock. I remember, the next I remember, I remember we were on the way to I was in the ambulance, and I saw, that they were cutting my shirt, and I thought they were cutting my vest. So I think I said, but I'm sure my mouth was filling up with blood. In my mind, I told the guy, I remember I grabbed his arm, and he looked at me, and I said, don't cut my vests, they're expensive. I thought I said that, and then I remember I didn't want to spit on the ambulance floor because I didn't want to get it dirty, but my mouth was just filling up with blood,
Did you have a hard time breathing?
I did. So I started, I remember when I leaned over and I was hanging over and I was just letting the blood run out of my mouth. I mean, it really started dawning on me that I'm dying. I just didn't think I was going to make it. And so a book I read 20 years ago in the military talked about, it was a story. A guy had got shot, it's a true story, a guy got shot in the back of the head, and the guy had talked about doing multiplication tables. And I'd keep his mind going. How I remember this, I don't know. But I tried to do, I couldn't do multiplication tables. So what I was doing is, I remember I was just staring at the ground, and I was just putting people's heads, their pictures in my head. I was thinking of my wife, and I was naming her name, my mom, and I was saying.
Trooper James Casey testifying there about having been shot allegedly by Ramon Bueno, but we know that there are issues with identification in this case. A lot of people think the state lined everything up to point to the defendant, but the defense is saying, no, that's not a done deal. Let's jump in with our defense attorneys. Now, Brian Buckmire, you're out in the newsroom, and a lot of you are sitting here talking around me saying you have issues with the way that this stop was conducted.
Yeah, the way the stop was conducted, to me at least, appears to be incorrect. Only as far as it goes to asking for ID for all of the occupants. You have the ability to ask ID of anyone you believe you have probable cause to arrest based on a traffic violation. However, if you're not operating that vehicle, you can't commit the crime of a traffic violation, so asking the occupants doesn't make sense. But that's a constitutional suppression issue. That's not a trial issue, so that boat has kind of sailed.
Okay, so Adam Konta, do you agree with Brian's analysis, and do you think, oh, well, that's just the way it's going to roll in this case?
Yes and no. I agree that the stop sounds like there's something a little off. If he can't describe an articulable, reasonable suspicion that there was an actual crime, then I don't see the reason to ask for an ID. So yes, the boat has sailed on that issue as far as suppression, but the defense can still certainly bring it up in cross-examination as to what led to these events.
If the defense did that, Katherine, would it even matter at this point? Because the bottom line is we have a shooting and we're looking at a different set of facts here.
It doesn't matter. And that's the thing. This is coming from a constitutional attorney where this is all I do is really parse this stuff out. It really is not that germane to how this went down. Bottom line is, did he see the shooter?
Great panel discussion here. We're going to remain watching this testimony here on the Law&Crime Network. Recaps tomorrow. If you'd like to continue watching for yourself, go to our raw feeds on lawandcrime.com.